What's the unluckiest way someone has ever died? Some guys were killed while training in an airplane simulator because a plane crashed into that building. That is some strong irony right there. This is either the best or the worst flight simulator of all time. I'll give it to the people who were killed at the end of World War I and II because news of the ceasefire and surrender hadn't reached them yet. Or the guy who fought for 30 years after the war ended. I saw a link to it a week ago, forgot to save it. Didn't think it would be relevant again. Forgot this is Reddit where everything is relevant again within a day or two. A few months ago one of my neighbor was sitting on his truck ready to get out from his garage. For some reason he stopped for a second before getting out. At that exact moment another neighbor, an old lady, ducked right behind the truck to pick something up or tie her shoes, something like that, without realizing the car was about to move. He ran over her not knowing she was there. He was about 22 and knew her since he was born. Something similar happened a few weeks ago in my town. Man and wife were in the process of moving to a new house they had bought. Man is sitting in U-Haul checking over a list of things to make sure they brought it. Woman gets out to remove the wedges from the U-Haul tires. Man somehow lets the U-Haul, which had been loaded to the brim with stuff, go into neutral, which runs over and kills his wife. A guy here in the Philippines survived to be over 100 years old and accidentally died because he took a swig from a bottle of paint thinner, mistaking it for gin. A Danish writer did that, but with a glass of bleach he had used to clean a stain on his trousers the day before. After the Asiana plane crash landed in San Francisco, this one girl managed to survive the crash, only to be run over and killed by one of the rescue trucks. She was hidden and phoned BTW. Worst way to die. According to a former NYC medical examiner, what's the worst way to die is the next most asked question, to which Melanek usually replies, you don't want to know. When people insist, however, she tells them about Sean Doyle. Around Christmas 2002, bartender Doyle went out drinking with pal Michael Wright and Wright's girlfriend. As they all walked home, Wright thought Doyle was hitting on his girlfriend, and witnesses later told cops they saw a man getting the ST beat out of him. He was heard screaming, "No, don't break my legs," and another witness said he saw someone throw Doyle down an open manhole. The drop was 18 feet. At the bottom was a pool of boiling water from a broken main. Doyle didn't die instantly. In fact, as first responders arrived, he was standing below, reaching up and screaming for help. No paramedic or firefighter could climb down to help. It was, a Con Ed supervisor said, 300 degrees in the steam tunnel. 4 hours later, Sean Doyle's body was finally recovered. Its temperature was 125 degrees. The medical examiners thought it was likely way higher, but thermometers don't read any higher than that. When Melanek saw the body on her autopsy table, she writes, she thought he'd been steamed like a lobster. His entire outer layer of skin had peeled off, and his internal organs were literally cooked. He otherwise had no broken bones and no head trauma, which meant he was fully conscious as he boiled to death. The worst nightmares I ever had in my 2 years at OCME, Melanek writes, came after I performed the post-mortem examination of Sean Doyle. My uncle used to work as a paramedic. He said the worst way he saw a person go was during an incident in which a car got sucked under an 18-wheeler. The girl driving the car got skinned alive. Karen Wetterhan comes to mind, a chem professor at Dartmouth. She was performing studies with dimethylmercury and spilled 1 or 2 drops on a gloved hand. Well, unbeknownst to the world, that crap permeates heavy latex and the skin underneath like it doesn't exist. Her mercury levels spiked to 80 times the toxic threshold, killing her within a year, much of which was spent vegetative. A guy in my complex died of a stroke. He probably could have made it, but some idiot jumped in front of the ambulance as it was on its way. That idiot lived, however. Honestly, who tries suicide by ambulance? I want to die, but I want someone else's ghost to be there too, and I want that ghost to be angry with me. A great something of mine was in a train accident. He survived. His mates broke a window to get him out, and as he was dragged through the window, a spear of glass went into his heart and killed him. That is some Final Destination crap right there. In 1972, Vera Zermak of Prague decided to commit suicide on learning of her husband's infidelity. She jumped from her apartment balcony, only to land on her husband who was returning home. She survived as he cushioned her fall, but he was killed by the impact. Pretty lucky for her, and lucky for him. I think that's the universe just trying to point her in the right direction. So I attended this house in response to a report of a deceased male in the bedroom. Turns out he was the ex-boyfriend of this woman. After a thorough investigation, it was concluded that he had planned to break in, get really drunk and overdose on pills so the woman would find him dead in her bedroom. Well, the unlucky thing for him was he got so drunk he passed out on a chair with his head tilted down, blocking his airway before he swallowed any pills. The guy literally died by accident before he could commit suicide. I saw this a few years back on the news. These two girls survived a car crash, made it out of the wreckage and were so happy about it they hugged each other only to be hit by a car. But they both died. In Hawaii there was a car accident. The car hit the guardrail and I think most of the passengers died. All teenagers. The next night a group of their friends went to the crash site to set up a memorial and then a car smashed into them, killing most of them as well. The second person to successfully go down Niagara Falls, which he did in a large steel barrel. Years later, he slipped on an orange peel, broke his leg, got gangrene, and then died. When I did my first aid training they were talking about the importance of getting a tetanus shot if you cut yourself with something dirty or when outside. People get a small cut when out gardening or whatever and end up dying. I just feel like, especially in 2017, it's crazy that people can die from something so dull. A careers day talk by a person from births, deaths and marriages, I know riveting stuff, told us of the statistic that 8 people a year in UK kill themselves getting out of bed. We learned of one 35-year-old woman who scrambled so frantically to answer the phone she became tied up in her sheets. When she tried to rush out the bed the sheets caught and she fell hard and broke her neck, instantly killing her. I think it was her mother calling too. Sounds like a really emotional department to work in, LOL. Heard a story of a local man who dropped his keys down a sewer grate on side of the road. When he tried to get the keys he got stuck. Happened to be a torrential downpour and he drowned. About 20 years in Louisville, KY, a lady died from a coat hanger going through her head. She was driving with her window down and passed someone mowing their lawn. They hit a coat hanger and it shot out from the lawn mower, through her open window and into her head. That is some Final Destination crap. During winter a guy was walking to his front door when a large icicle fell from a tree limb and pieced him through the neck and into his chest cavity. As a Michigander, this is something we are taught to be careful of as kids. My parents always told me not to play with the ice dams. There was a lady a few years ago in India, I believe, who was hit by a meteorite. Imagine for potentially billions of years a giant rock in outer space was destined to kill you. I read destined as determined and I like that better, so I'll just stick with my version of reality. We knew a guy, a butcher, who was walking his 2 kids and down by the wharf. The pram with the baby in it fell into the water when the older boy accidentally knocked it. The older kid panicked and fell into and the dad drowned unsuccessfully trying to save his kids. Mike Edwards, member of the band Electric Light Orchestra, died when a half-ton cylindrical hay bale rolled down a hill and into the van that he was driving down the highway at the time. A guy with a wife that had a sore neck refused to take her to a doctor or chiropractor and instead decided to fix her neck himself. But he didn't do it with his hands. Oh no, he built a wooden rope device that operated very similar to a noose. He didn't want his wife to get hurt, so he tested it on himself first, and wouldn't you know it, it hanged him and he died. Elvis Presley's death on the toilet. His autopsy revealed that he died due to severe constipation. His colon was about 5-6 inches in diameter compared to the normal 2-3 inches, and apparently he had a 5-month-old stool just chilling in his intestines. Just think about that for a second. I know that I've had some hellish experiences on the job, but at least I wasn't trying to pass a stool that's been accumulating for almost half a year. A semi-truck driver was traveling south on I-75 when his cab caught on fire. He pulled over onto the shoulder, opened the passenger door to avoid traffic and the fire itself, and jumped out. The most unfortunate part of the story is that he parked on a bridge without knowing due to the smoke filling the cab. When he jumped out, he plunged to his death in the river below. This happened in 2015 in KY. Nasiruddin Muhammad, also known as Humayun. He spent a sizable chunk of his lifetime to regain his lost kingdom, and succeeded. Then 2 weeks later he fell down some stairs in his library and died shortly after. It's the one thing I remember from my world history AP class in high school. At least he got the pleasure of succeeding. So many stories end shortly before. I heard of this one recently. During World War II, Allied intelligence discovered what was believed to be the muzzles of a set of massive artillery guns being built inside a mountain in France that the Nazis had hollowed out. Conventional bombing raids were undertaken with dozens of planes carpet bombing the area, but being built so deeply in this mountain, it was a useless effort. So the Allies came up with two solutions to the problem. Solution 1 was from a British scientist who built the first real bunker-busting bomb that would penetrate some 50 feet underground before detonating a very large explosive designed to destroy the foundation of this gun emplacement and shake it all to pieces. 13 bombers dropped these new bombs on the emplacement, but further aerial reconnaissance showed that the raid most likely had failed. So plan B was from the Americans, who were going to cram a B-24 full of as much high explosive as it could carry, and then a second plane, controlling the first via RC, would guide it to the breach of the mountain and basically just ram it. So the Americans created and tested a very simple fly-by-wire apparatus, but the drone craft, as it were, had to be piloted off the ground and over the channel before the pilot and company pilot would bail out and the chase plane would guide the bomb to target. The pilot selected for this mission was Joe Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's older brother and one of America's up-and-coming figures in the American political arena. Joe was a Navy pilot who had completed the number of missions required to return home with honor and be discharged. However, Joe felt that as he had seen little action, flying this mission might be a sort of vindication for him, so he hung around to take part in something that, he felt, might actually make a difference. So, the bomb plane had a remote control system implemented, but it also had a remote arming mechanism controlled by a radio signal on a designated frequency that should have been void of any traffic. A naval engineer made the observation that a rogue radio signal could arm the detonator for the explosives unintentionally, and he made his concerns well known, even to Joe himself. But the command staff ignored it and Joe took the plane up on schedule. Joe and his co-pilot blew up somewhere over England, well short of their planned bailout point. A short while later, Canadian troops captured the mountain complex only to discover that the British bunker busters had in fact shook the base to bits and it had been deserted for some time. Robert Liston, who was a surgeon, amputated the leg in under 12 minutes. The patient died afterwards and the ward from hospital gangrene. They usually did in those pre-Listerian days. He amputated in addition the fingers of his young assistant, who died afterwards in the ward from hospital gangrene. He also slashed through the coattails of a distinguished surgical spectator, who was so terrified that the knife had pierced his vitals he dropped dead from fright. That was the only operation in history with a 300% mortality. Franz Ferdinand has got to be pretty high on that list. What are the chances that your driver takes the wrong turn and one of the assassins who failed to kill him 10 minutes earlier, now drinking a cup of tea at a cafe, gets a second shot because the car stalled while reversing back up the street to rejoin his escort? It's a common assumption that the driver was in on it. Can't remember if there was proof. The more incredible part of the story is after the assassins failed, he tried to take his cyanide pill that didn't kill him because it expired. Well, this is more gross than unlucky. Apparently this woman was into bestiality. When she decided to make fantasy a reality, it turns out she was allergic to dog semen. So yeah, death by dog spunk. Or the dude who was similarly attracted to horses died of a perforated colon. Death by horsing around. I have distant relatives who traveled to Ireland in the 1950s to celebrate their honeymoon. Once back in England and on the train back to their home on the east coast, the train jolted and a heavy suitcase fell on the bride's head and broke her neck. She never made it home. Always struck me as a horribly unlucky way to die. I read about it a while ago so my details might be off, but there was a man in Asia somewhere that died from a heart attack or something after he caught a Lapras in Pokemon Go. Rumors have it that the man was also wearing shoes at the time of the heart attack, a joke that appeared in Pokemon Go subs shortly after. Gary Hoy. Apparently Hoy enjoyed showing people how strong the windows were in his office building. He would fling himself at the window and would always bounce off. One day in 1993, Hoy attempted this trick again in front of a group of law students. He bounced off unharmed the first time, but the window popped out of the frame on Hoy's second attempt. He fell 24 stories to his death. More stupid than unlucky. I once read about a man who was going to shoot himself and was interrupted by his wife urging him to reconsider. Realizing how much he loved her, he dropped the gun on the floor. It went off unexpectedly and the round killed his wife. I think you should head to the Darwin Awards website for stories on some unlucky and plain stupid ways people have died. This one is really tragic in a horribly ironic way. Reminds me of that Twilight Zone episode where the guy can finally read all the books he wants but then his glasses break. I always thought that the conquistador Melchor Diaz was pretty unfortunate. He was riding a horse and threw a spear at a dog to get it away from their livestock. The spear stuck in the ground and the horse kept riding. Diaz took the blunt end of a spear to the groin at full horse speed and didn't die for 20 days. When my uncle was about 7, he was standing on a pier at a popular lake and some kids were throwing rocks around and one hit him in the head and knocked him unconscious. He fell in the water and drowned before anyone noticed. That's what he gets for standing on another kid his age. My friend was jumping onto a London double-deck bus, the open back platform type. As he put his hands in his pockets to pay the fare, the bus hit a pothole and he fell out and hit his head. He was unable to protect his head as his hands were jammed in his pockets. Very sad. He was 25 years old. Must be my dog. He was lying outside in the street in front of my father's business store. A guy suicided and fell onto my dog. Guy lived thanks to my dog but Hunter died. I mean, what are the odds? I have an uncle that is a fireman. One of his first calls was an escort with paramedics to pick up a body. A man had died in his bathroom, skin mags all over the floor and a frozen chicken in his lap. Well, mostly frozen. Turns out his daughter hadn't heard from him in some time and sent her husband over to check on him. Son-in-law found him and called 911. Looks like he tried to choke the chicken, but it iced him instead. My neighbor slipped on ice, hit his head, and froze to death in the middle of the night. I walked right by while he was unconscious and didn't see him behind his bushes. A narcoleptic man was working at an industrial job that involved rather large ovens to cure the wood chairs that they made. One day he sets a chair in the large oven and sits in it. Unfortunately for him, he undergoes an episode of narcolepsy. The man proceeds to be burned alive by a co-worker who didn't notice him sleeping. You figure that somewhere, at some time, there's been someone who's just about to get laid, perhaps for the first time even. And right before they go about getting some afternoon delight, the excitement causes them to collapse and die of a heart attack. So close, yet so far. There was an old man who won a Howard Stern contest to get laid at the Bunny Ranch. He wanted to get a big steak dinner before all the sex, choked on a piece of steak and died right there in the restaurant. Pierre Curie, the French physicist, was walking in Paris during a rainy day in 1906. When crossing the street, Curie fell. Simultaneously, the wheel of a horse's carriage ran over his head, shattering his skull. Curie died instantly. A friend wanted to see how long he could hold his breath underwater in a pool, drowned, had to be revived on the edge of the pool, and his plug pulled at the hospital from being in a vegetative state 2 weeks later. Nobody could even come close to holding their breath that long. Don't drink in the Florida sun all day and expect a great outcome. In my hometown in the 50s, a set of twin boys were at the local pool and decided to see who could hold their breath the longest, and they both drowned. A girl that went to school with my sister, her mother, very strict woman, wouldn't let her go on a school trip to another country because she thought it was very dangerous, and she, the girl, had to stay at home because every teacher was out in the trip. She went for a walk when suddenly a flower pot from a balcony fell in her head, causing her death. The mother was so protective. Yet not letting her child go was a decision that will haunt her for the rest of her life. In Argentina, 1988, Cachi the poodle falls 13 stories, hits an old lady on the head, instantly killing both. A woman who witnessed the scene gets hit by a bus due to being unaware. An old man across the street dies from a heart attack, presumably from witnessing both of these events unfold, or so the story goes. Some years back, an eagle catches an injured cobra and is taking cobra somewhere. Meanwhile, two men are riding in a motorcycle. The cobra falls on the motorcycle and bites the one sighting behind. He falls off and eagle again comes and takes the cobra. Such an unlucky person he is. Cobra falling from the sky, who expects that in daytime? I, for one, am only wary of cobras falling from the sky during the evening. Here in Australia, we had 3 morons having a blue in the KFC car park. One pulls out a gun and fires, hitting Bob Knight, a truck driver, who was driving his rig about 200 meters away. Bob had the window slightly down, enough for the bullet to pass through unobstructed and into his head, killing him instantly. A few millimeters up or down, a few meters per second slow or quicker, literally any other speed or time, and Bob is probably alive. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.